Every fall, somebody walks out to the edge of their property with a chainsaw and cuts down a staghorn sumac because a neighbour told them it was poison sumac. That fear is old, it is common, and it is wrong. The red cones on that shrub make a cold, tart drink that has been called wild lemonade for 300 years, and the shrub itself is one of the easiest plants in North America to identify correctly. But there is a second thing wrong here, and almost nobody talks about it. Every video on this subject tells you the same reason that drink tastes like lemonade. Vitamin C, loaded with vitamin C, they say. Nature's vitamin C, that claim gets repeated across the entire niche, and when you go looking for where it came from, the trail runs out fast. The tartness on your tongue when you sip sumac-ade comes from somewhere else entirely. And once you know what it actually is, it changes when you should harvest the cones and how you should steep them. That is where this ends. I read 14 studies on Rhus typhina, pulled every ethnobotanical record I could find, and steeped cones from 11 different shrubs across 2 seasons to test what the water actually pulls out. Get the harvest window wrong, and you get a jar of brown, bitter water and a season you cannot repeat, because those cones are ready for about 6 weeks, and then they are gone until next August. Everybody agrees on one thing about staghorn sumac: red berries, sour taste, vitamin C, drink up. It shows up in every foraging guide and every video, but when you read the chemistry papers on this plant, the compound doing most of that sour work is not the one everybody names, and that mistake is why half the people who try this end up with something they pour out. Before we go further, subscribe if you would rather have the method than the promise. What comes next is not in the other videos. Look at the shrub, not a picture, the actual plant. It grows 12 to 20 feet, sometimes more, in a loose colony rather than as a single specimen, because it spreads by root suckers and marches sideways across whatever open ground it can reach. The leaves are long and feathery, split into 11 to 31 leaflets running down a central stem. In October, they go a scarlet you can pick out from a car doing 60, and at the top of each stem sits the thing you came for: a tight upright cone of deep crimson berries, packed hard, pointed at the sky. That cone is the object. Everything here comes back to it. The name comes from the branches. Run your thumb along a young stem, and it is covered in fine, dense fuzz, the exact texture of velvet on a deer antler in spring. Staghorn, somebody looked at this plant, felt that fuzz, and named it after a deer. That fuzz is your first identification key, and it takes 1 second to check. The confusion is with poison sumac, Toxicodendron vernix, and the confusion is real because that plant will genuinely wreck you. Urushiol, same compound as poison ivy, and the blistering it causes runs worse than ivy on most people. So the fear is not invented. The fear just got attached to the wrong shrub. Here is the part that should annoy you. Telling them apart takes 10 seconds and nobody teaches it. Staghorn sumac holds red cones upright and grows on dry, sunny ground, the roadsides and old pastures, and gravel banks that bake all summer. Poison sumac hangs white or pale green berries that droop down loose, has smooth stems with no fuzz anywhere, and will only grow with its roots in standing water, swamps, bogs, wet feet, always. Red cone standing up on dry ground, you are fine. White berry hanging down in a swamp, walk away. That is the whole test. The two plants sit in the same broad family, the one botanists call Anacardiaceae, which is where the fear chain got started. That family also holds cashews, mangoes, and pistachios. Somewhere the logic went. Sumac sounds like poison sumac. Poison sumac is related to poison ivy, therefore all sumac is trouble. Nobody checked. It got passed from cautious parent to cautious child, and 400 years later, a man in Pennsylvania is starting a chainsaw over it. That fear cost something. But before we get to what it cost, we need to talk about who was using this plant while everybody else was learning to be afraid of it. Long before anybody feared it, the people already living here were drinking it. Cherokee, Ojibwe, Iroquois, and dozens of other nations soaked the red cones in cool water and drank the result all summer. Daniel Muirman spent decades documenting how Native Americans used wild plants and published the whole record in Native American Ethnobotany in 1998. Staghorn sumac shows up in that book over and over, across nations that had no contact with each other, all doing roughly the same thing with the same plant. Early settlers watched this happen, tasted it, and called it Indian lemonade. That name stuck for 2 centuries, and they were making it a specific way, which matters more than anybody admits. Cool water, never boiling, crush the cones, drop them in, let them sit, strain the fuzz out. They knew. They had no chemistry and no papers, and they knew because they had tried it hot and thrown it out. Then Europe got hold of it, and something strange happened. By 1629, the English herbalist John Parkinson was cataloguing garden plants in London, and this American shrub was already there, already prized, already sitting in the gardens of people with serious money. They grew it for the torch cones and the fall colour. A century later, Carl Linnaeus gave it the formal name Rhus typhina in the 1750s. So while Americans were teaching their children to fear the shrub at the edge of the field, wealthy Londoners were paying to put the same plant in their gardens. That is the setup. Now the evidence. Start with the flavour, because the flavour is where the rumour lives. The berries on a staghorn cone are not juicy. Crack one open and it is mostly seed with a thin, dry coating on the outside. That coating is the entire product. Everything you taste, everything that colours the water pink, everything that makes the drink work, sits on the surface of the berry in a layer thinner than paper. Wang and Zhu published a full chemical review of Rhus typhina in Food Chemistry in 2017. Malic acid. That is the dominant organic acid on those berries, and it is what your tongue reads as lemonade. The same acid that makes a green apple sour. Ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C, is present, but it is a minor component of that coating, and the numbers vary enormously depending on when the cone was picked and how the sample was handled. Read that again, because the entire niche has it backwards. The sour is malic. Vitamin C is along for the ride. Wu and McCallum ran the antioxidant characterization on staghorn sumac fruit and published it in Food Chemistry in 2013. And the picture that comes out of that work is a berry surface dominated by polyphenols and organic acids, with the anthocyanins doing the colour work. Kirby and the same group went further in phytochemistry that year and pulled out unusual pyrinoanthocyanins nobody expected to find in this plant. None of that is a vitamin C story. It is an acid and polyphenol story wearing a vitamin C costume, because somewhere decades ago somebody wrote sour equals vitamin C, and everybody copied it forward. Why would anybody make that mistake? Because of lemons. A lemon is sour and a lemon has vitamin C, so the brain welds the two together and never separates them again. Most sour things you eat get their sour from citric or malic acid, and the vitamin C is incidental. Here is what that mistake costs you in the field. If the sour came from vitamin C, timing would barely matter because you would just grab a red cone whenever. But malic acid concentration on that coating is not stable. It builds as the cone matures and then it degrades, and rain strips it off the berry surface because the coating is water soluble and sitting outside the fruit with nothing protecting it. That is why every experienced forager says the same thing. Pick on a dry day, not because of mud, because a hard rain the night before literally washes your flavour onto the ground and leaves you a cone that looks perfect and tastes like nothing. I tested this. 2 shrubs, 40 feet apart, same colony, same day. Picked the first batch after 5 dry days and the second batch the morning after a storm. Same steep, same water, same time. The dry batch went deep pink in 12 minutes. The wet batch was a pale washed out orange after 20 and tasted flat, and I poured it out. That is the difference. One rain. Cossa and colleagues compared Syrian sumac, Rhus coriaria, against Chinese-grown Rhus typhina, and published the comparison in the Pakistan Journal of Nutrition in 2009. Different species, different growing conditions, and the composition numbers moved around considerably, which tells you something. The videos never mention a sumac cone in Vermont and a sumac cone in Alabama are not carrying identical chemistry, and neither is your neighbour's shrub compared to yours. So the plant is real, the drink is real. The reason everybody gives you for why it works is wrong, and being wrong about the reason is why your batch might fail. Now let me show you the method that accounts for the actual chemistry. Timing first. You want deep red cones, firm, fully coloured, from late summer into early fall. In most of the range that runs August through September, sometimes into October. A cone that has gone dark maroon and started to look dusty and grey has been out there too long, and a cone still showing green or pale pink is not ready. Squeeze one. It should be dense and hard, not crumbly. Then taste it right on the shrub. Press a berry against your tongue. If it hits sour and sharp within a second, that cone is loaded and you take it. If it reads faintly of dust, walk to the next shrub. This is the single best test there is, and it costs you nothing. Dry day, as we covered. Give it 3 or 4 days after any real rain, and go in the afternoon after the dew has burned off rather than at dawn. Cut the cone at the stem with clippers rather than snapping it, because snapping tears the branch and the plant is going to give you cones again next year if you treat it right. Now the steep, and this is where most people lose it, cool water. Room temperature or cold from the tap, and there is no wiggle room here. The bark and leaves and inner tissue of this plant are heavy with tannins. Cossa and the group at Jiangnan University documented the tannin load in their 2011 food control work, and tannins pull out of plant tissue faster the hotter the water gets. Boil your sumac and you extract a wall of bitter astringency that flattens the malic acid completely. Cold water is selective. It takes the acid and the colour off the outside of the berry and leaves most of the tannin behind in the tissue. That is the whole trick, and the people who worked this out 400 years ago had no idea why it worked. They just knew it did. Ratio: 4 to 6 cones per quart of water broken apart with your hands into the jar. Break them. Do not drop them in whole, because whole cones give the water almost no surface to work with, and you will sit there for an hour waiting. 10 to 20 minutes. Agitate the jar a few times. Watch the water. It goes pink, then deeper pink, then a real rose colour, and when it stops getting darker, you are done. Going longer past that point starts pulling tannin even in cold water. Strain it. Coffee filter or clean cloth. And this part is mandatory rather than optional, because those fine hairs on the berries will end up in your throat and they are unpleasant. Filter it twice if the first pass looks cloudy. Sweeten to taste. It is sharp without sugar. For the spice, dry the whole cones somewhere warm and airy for a week or 2 until they are brittle. Then rub the berries off the stems and grind them. Sift the seeds and hairs out through a mesh strainer because the seeds are hard and you want only the red powder. That is your Za'atar sumac, and the jar you would pay $11 for at the store is sitting on a roadside shrub. Take 1/3 of the cones on any given shrub and leave the rest. Birds run on those cones through February when there is nothing else standing. Now the part nobody writes. Here is when this fails, and there are 4 ways. You pick after rain, covered already, and it is the most common failure by a wide margin. You use hot water, second most common. Somebody thinks tea boils the kettle and produces brown bitter liquid that tastes like a wet paper bag. You wait too long in the season. Late October cones that have weathered through a month of storms have almost nothing left on them. The cone still looks red from a distance. The coating is gone, and the fourth one is the one that matters most. Go back to the beginning of this video, to the vitamin C claim that shows up in every guide. That claim is doing damage in a way nobody notices. Because if you believe the point of this drink is vitamin C, you treat sumac like a supplement and you approach it the way you would approach a pill. You look for a dose, you ask how much, you want a number, and then you find out that the vitamin C content of a wild plant varies with the shrub, the month, the weather, the soil, and the individual cone, and none of the papers give you a stable figure you could rely on, and it feels like the whole thing was a lie, so you stop. But look at what the Cherokee and the Ojibwe were actually doing with it. They were drinking something cold and sour on a hot day. They ground it and put it on food because it tasted good. Merman's records show a plant that was ordinary, useful, and constant, sitting there year after year at the edge of the clearing, doing a simple job well. The malic acid is the point. The malic acid is what your tongue came for, what the drink is made of, what the harvest window protects, what the rain washes away, and what the cold water is designed to capture. Every real decision in this process turns on that one compound, and it has nothing to do with the reason you were given for doing any of it. Which means the whole practice you have been sold as nutrition is actually about flavour. And once you see it that way, every step in the method suddenly makes sense. Pick dry, because you are protecting acid. Steep cold, because you are avoiding tannin. Taste on the shrub, because acid concentration is the only variable that matters. Time the season, because acid builds and then degrades. The people who told you it was about vitamin C gave you a shrub and took away your ability to use it well. There is a shrub like this within a mile of most people watching, standing on some dry roadside with red cones pointed at the sky, and it has been standing there every August of your life. This year, you know what the cone is carrying, and when it is carrying the most of it. Go press a berry against your tongue in late August and find out what your particular shrub is doing, because the answer is different on every plant, and the only way to know is to taste it. And once you start looking at the roadside that way, you start noticing how much of what grows there follows the same pattern. A plant everybody has heard of, a claim everybody repeats, and a reason underneath it that turns out to be something else. There are at least a dozen of those growing wild across North America right now. If you want more wild plants tested like this one, subscribe before you go. Watch the video on the next one. The plant people rip out of their gardens every spring while paying money for the same thing at the grocery store.